Welcome, 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 brothers and sisters. Welcome to a second reading, teaching, study topic presentation for today. Welcome for tapping into this channel. Thank you for being here. And let us open up this teaching study with Psalm 27. And Psalm 27 is all about this. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy also upon me and answer me. When thou sayest, seek ye my face, my heart saith unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me, put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, Lord, neither forsake me, O my beloved, loving God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsook me, then the Lord will take me up. Teach me thy ways, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies. Deliver me not over unto the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And with this said, I have opened up this marvelous study hour. As you can see, this titled The Divine Wounding, and this teaching reflects Isaac's life. And I'm going to start. Isaac's life was peaceful, with no strivings. Jacob's way was one long struggle throughout. For Isaac, everything went easily. Jacob found even the simplest things presenting difficulties. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all three. So we cannot have Isaac without Jacob, nor praise God, Jacob without Isaac. We ourselves are in the position of both. From the Lord's side, we are rich, complete in Christ. Yet, because of our own natural strength, God's hand has a chastening and a formative work to do upon us. We cannot escape the discipline, but equally surely we shall never be without the absolute fullness of divine bestowal. And I am presenting this study topic from the book Changed into His Likeness from Watchman Nee. And it reflects the characteristics of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which also are in us. So, through this teaching, we are being mirrored these characteristics of these three men who we also are having in us. So we cannot escape the discipline, but equally, surely, we shall never be without the absolute fullness of divine bestowal. If there is a difference in the discipline, it is because some of us have more of Jacob to be dealt with than do others. That is all. So Proverbs 13, verse 15 tells us that the way of transgressors is hard, that is, tough or rugged. Jacob's way was like that because he was like that. He was a tough guy. The hard, rugged self in Jacob required a lot of time for God to deal with it. And let us look in the mirror and see if we have some of these Jacob characteristics also in us. And many of us will be of little use unless God has taken significant time to handle us. Jacob was a usurper and a cheat. He loved to cheat. God will not let such a man escape. Some ask why God spent so much time on Jacob as though it were an easy thing to deal with any man. To receive as Isaac received is something done in a minute. We enter into our inheritance as soon as our hearts respond with a thank you to what God reveals. But Jacob's difficulty is a lifelong thing. As long as we live, our natural strength pursues us. It is always being dealt with by God, though there is a time when this is especially true. Those who do not know themselves do not know Jacob, because they never have seen this Jacob characteristic in the mirror. We need to be aware how the flesh always takes care of itself, cheating others to do so, and being cheated if we are going to understand this man. For with all God's dealings with him in Laban's home, Jacob was still largely unchanged. Cheating, scheming, planning were yet in his character. How much of us have these same characteristics in us? But as we have seen, after 20 years and with the birth of Joseph, Jacob bethought himself of home. Genesis 30, verse 25. Then it was that for the first time in Haran, God spoke to him. Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. And again, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now rise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family." So Jacob prepared himself to go, but Laban was not likely to let him go easily. In spite of everything, God had blessed Laban for Jacob's sake. So Jacob left secretly, and Laban followed him. But it was God who had sent Jacob back, and God protected him. At God's time, he sets us free when the testing has accomplished its purpose. God let us go, and no man, not even Laban, can keep us. So when Laban eventually caught up with Jacob, they made a covenant together. Laban was respectful, and he swore by the God of Abraham and of Nahor. Jacob swore, however, by the God of his father Isaac. He bore witness to the fact that God's promises was according to God's choice. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice. Laban had none. Something surely had happened to Jacob. When he first went out, it was his mother who sent him. Now God sends him home, and he goes. He has learned to recognize God's voice. Discipline had not changed him much, but he had at least advanced into wanting God. In his early years, he had wanted only God's purpose because it fitted in with his desires. He wanted God's will, but not God himself. Now, at last, he had some desire for God himself. He had heard his voice, and now he sacrificed. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Genesis 31, verse 55. And also Genesis 32, verse 2. Jacob had left Laban, having been protected from him by God. So now angels met him. God had opened Jacob's eyes to see that just as he had delivered him from Laban, so God, would deliver him from everyone else. The name Mahanaim means two companies. Not you alone, Jacob, one company, but always God's company with you. It was not that the angels had just arrived, but that Jacob's eyes were at last opened to see them. So do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. 2 Kings 6, verse 16 and 17. At this point, we may well ask, could all the conditions possibly be more favorable for Jacob? He had God's command, God's promise, God's protection, and now a vision of the angels with him. Surely this was enough to make anyone trust God. But Jacob was still Jacob. God's grace does not alter the flesh. So, in the following verses, Jacob sends a very lowly, flattering message to his brother Esau. My Lord, your servant, he says in Genesis chapter 32, verse 3 and 4. He had already forgotten God's call and God's grace and God's protection. He thought his own specious words could somehow change Esau. That was Jacob still, just the same as he ever was. But Esau started out to meet him with 400 men. What did that mean? Good or bad? It struck dismay in Jacob's heart. Clever people have many worries. Schemers pile up troubles for themselves. Those who think and contrive and do not trust and believe find themselves like Jacob, greatly afraid and distressed. Jacob's one problem, as always, was what to do. But trust him, he still had plans. God had sent him now to Canaan, so he could not flee back to Mesopotamia, yet he dare not let God look after the results of his obedience. How many of us obey God by the front door and make preparations to retreat by the back? Jacob tried both to obey God and at the same time to escape his brother. In his fear and distress, we are told that Jacob divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. Genesis 32, verse 7. Here we find the same word, Mahanaim, that occurred in verse 2. Jacob had substituted his Mahanaim for God's. There had been one earthly company and one heavenly one, but he divided his earthly company into two. So perhaps he would impress his brother, who would scarcely have eyes for the unseen. So now in the verses 9 to 12 of this same chapter 32 of Genesis, we have Jacob's first real prayer. He has made some progress, though it has not yet reached a high level. In his early years, it was all scheming and bargaining and no prayer. Now it is both scheming and prayer. Yet if we pray, we need not scheme. If we scheme, there is often no meaning in our prayer. But Jacob still did both. On the one hand, he trusted God. On the other hand, he did the work himself. To trust God completely would be too reckless. For suppose God's words fell empty to the ground, how like us he was. Of course, I am a Christian, so I must trust God. But to trust God fully and completely is taking too great a risk. So Jacob elaborated his plans in chapter 32 of Genesis, verses 13 to 18. So remember, this man had just prayed. This stratagem, however, was to be his masterpiece. Of course, he knew his brother, that he was a hunter, so he truly faced the most dangerous crisis of his life. Never before had he, Jacob, expended so much thought and effort as he put into this. After all, more than his possessions, His very life itself depended on the outcome. But Jacob was equal to the situation. He who had been through all these years of God's discipline could still summon the wits to produce an answer. In a series of mollifying gestures, he would let everything go if necessary to Esau, and so at least save his skin. It was a great scheme, the best he had ever made. Moreover, he believed in his own plans and trusted to them, and yet he had prayed. He looked to God and made the most elaborate preparations. It was on that night that God met him. There had never been a night when he was more afraid. On previous occasions, it did not so much matter whether he succeeded or not. This time, it was a matter of life and death to him, Jacob. He had used all his wits, all his strength to meet a most difficult situation, and everything hung on the outcome. All the others had passed on across the ford. Remaining behind on this side, Jacob was completely left alone. Genesis 32, verse 24. Here at Peniel, God met him face to face, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Now it was that Jacob put forth his utmost strength. It was not Jacob who wrestled, but God who came and wrestled with Jacob to bring about his utter surrender. The object of wrestling is to force a man down until he is unable to move, so that he yields to the victor. Yet of God it is said that even here he did not prevail. That is to be found in verse 25. So Jacob possessed tremendous natural strength. Many of us know all too well what this means. We can still do so well ourselves. We employ all sorts of natural skills for our self-protection. It is as if God were defeated. Defeat is defeat. When you or I are defeated, it means I cannot. I yield. Yet being as we are, we have another try. God may overthrow our plans again and again and again, but we do not admit defeat. We do not give up. We just think we have not planned well enough, and the next time we must do better. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The angel had exclaimed to Abraham in Genesis 18, verse 14. But it is almost as if we say to the Lord, is anything too hard for me? One day we must acknowledge defeat, confessing that we know nothing at all and can do nothing at all. Jacob had yet to come there and still thought he knew Esau. For this last step, therefore, something more than discipline was necessary. Discipline brought Jacob as far as Peniel, and it brings us to the place where God can touch us fundamentally. But beware of boasting about God's disciplinary dealings, for until the question of our natural strength is finally settled, this kind of talk can only increase our pride. Wrestling illustrates God's method of dealing with us. It is finally to weaken us so that we cannot rise. God has his ways of doing things, his ways of doing this with each one of us. And this is why we are still facing the things that we are facing. If each human being in this world would now state and declare that it knows nothing and can do nothing all by itself, what a tremendous change would happen in this world. And then all those who try to manipulate the rest, they will fall down because they do not dare to acknowledge that they don't know a thing, that they cannot do anything on themselves at all. So he had used other men's, it might have meant a further 20 years. But when Jacob would not yield, God touched him. With a touch, he did what great strength would not do. The thigh is the strongest part of the body, a fitting type of our point of greatest natural strength. There must come a day when God dislocates that thigh, totally undermining and undoing our strength of nature, the will of the flesh. Your strong point and mine may be quite different from Jacob's. Ambition, boasting, emotion, self-love, each of us has his own. But for each of us, this dislocating work is a definite crisis of experience. With some of us, as we said, the trouble is a readiness to expose spiritual things. In all our work and life and conduct, the fruits are brought out on the surface and displayed. Exposure is, in such a case, the nerve center of our natural strength, and God must touch that. Self is dominant there. People's mistakes vary, and many of us have never seen where our nerve center is. But generally, all our mistakes spring from one inner principle. And when all symptoms point to one disease, that is our thigh. May God open our eyes to see the nerve center of our natural strength. For when that is touched, then there will be fruitfulness. One touch and Jacob was lamed. He could no longer wrestle. He was powerless. Dawn came, and he said to God, I will not let you go. But when any member, even a finger, is dislocated, the whole body is put out of action. Speaking physically, if God had wanted to go, he could perfectly well have gone off and left Jacob there. Jacob could not possibly have held him. But now that Jacob was truly weak, the wrestler could not leave him, for Jacob depended on him. It is when our thigh has been touched that we can hold God the closest. We are strongest when we are weakest. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 10. From man's standpoint, this looks impossible, but it is divine fact. It is small faith that accomplishes great things. I cannot hold you, but I can plead with you. I can scarcely even pray, yet I can plead. I have no faith, yet I believe. With an abundance of natural strength, we are useless to God. With no strength at all, we can hold unto Him. God's response to Jacob was amazing. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob. All right, postal service. So your name can no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Genesis 32, verse 28. And this means that the name Israel is in actuality referring to the spiritual Israel. So Jacob was the physical, the representation of the flesh Israel, and by the name changing, he became the spiritual Israel. He was the representation of the spiritual Israel. 10 years experience looked like defeat for Jacob. But God said he had prevailed. This is what happens when we surrender, beaten at God's feet. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name. I pray, and God said, why is it that you ask about my name? And God blessed him there. Jacob wanted to know who had done this, but he was not told. Jacob did not know who the wrestler was. When God, came, and he knew no more when God, went. He just knew that his own name had been changed and that he limped. This is the only time in the Word when God declined to reveal his name to a servant of his. Those touched by God do not know what has happened. When it really takes place, we do not know what it is. That is why it is so difficult to define. For God does not want us to wait for an experience. If we do, we shall not get it. So God wants our eyes fixed on God himself, not on experiences. Jacob only knew that somehow God had met him and that now he was crippled. The limp is the evidence, not merely the witness of one's lips. So we are to look to God to do the work in his own way and time. The result will be evident in us, and there will be no need to talk about it. And so with this said, I have come to the end of this very interesting study, and this study reveals indeed a lot. And let us look to the situation in this world. Isn't it that God is wrestling right now with each one of us? Yes, he is, but we do not see it as such. Some people lose everything before, and that is also a way of wrestling with God, losing everything, literally everything, and then come to the experience that you have been in wrestling with God, and that God has done work in you to break the will of the flesh, which is also called the natural will. So we are now dealing with situations in this world in which you can say that each one of us is in a certain way wrestling with God. And this wrestling looks for each one of us different. And also, are we dealing with a group of people that tries to distract and derail us with their carefully crafted lies and deceits and deceptions and illusions from this us away from this wrestling with God? So we need to look at our lives. What is happening in our life? Well, what is happening is that we are at the brink of losing everything, and losing everything that we hold dear to and of which we think is important to us. But what we think is important to us is not the definition that God has in mind and in his vocabulary of the meaning importance. So what we think that is important and we strive to stay onto and to hold onto, God can see this differently and say and says, no, you will lose that. And so step by step we see a world being formed in which more and more and more things are being taken away from us. What are the things that are at stake in this world? Freedom, sovereignty. The definition of freedom is not the definition that we know of what freedom is. The definition of freedom in God's terminology is living in accordance to God's will. If we do so, then we experience freedom. Freedom is not what we think by doing protests and making a declaration of human rights. That is not freedom at all. Freedom is walking the ways of God, doing his will. By doing his will, you will experience freedom. Freedom is not, as we think, attached to money. No, by having a good bank account, you have freedom. No, that's not freedom. That's an illusion. So we need to acknowledge for ourselves that we in actuality do not know what freedom means. We need to acknowledge for ourselves that we do not know a thing about ourselves, that we do not know a thing at all, and that we cannot do anything all by ourselves at all. We need this guidance, and we can see this because look at the world of today. It is one gigantic mess. People think that they can solve the problems, but instead the problems become worser and worser and worser. And this is something that is going on from generation onto generation. The children do not learn anything anymore. They don't know the basic principles of basic life. But the more important is that children are not learned anymore how to have this living communion with God Himself. And so everything in the education system is based on making sure that the child shall never find God in itself and shall always seek outside itself and shall always be dependent on other people and systems created by humans themselves, and especially created by humans who love to manipulate others, who love to control others. So, the message of this study is that we need to see in ourselves the Jacob characteristics in ourselves. How many times do we refuse to listen to the voice of God? How many times do we set aside His solutions? How many times do we ignore His ideas? And then we do our plans, our ideas. We work out our solutions. And then we are in anger, in frustration, because what we thought in our mind is not working in reality as we thought it would work. So let this teaching, the words of this teaching that I have passed on to you this morning and that the Father has guided me towards to pass on to you, let all the words of this teaching sink into your mind, into your heart, and into your soul, and that all these words may be seeds in your heart, in your soul, in your mind, and so that you come to the realization that your flesh will needs to be broken. And so that you come into the realization that to have this broken, that you have allow yourselves to be in this wrestle with God as Jacob did. And with this said, I come to the end of this marvelous teaching. And I leave this screen and I go to the end screen. I want to thank you all for tapping into this channel. I want to thank you for listening to all these words of wisdom that I was allowed to pass on to you. I wish you all a beautiful, joyful day filled with a lot of love, wisdom, truth, clarity, understanding, and also revelation and discernment. Discernment is something we need the most today. And also when the Father is placing it upon your heart to be there for a fellow brother, sister, ask the Christ within you to show you how you can be of service to a fellow brother, sister. All right. As last, I want to say, let us listen to a beautiful piece of music from Bensound called Better Days. I wish you all a beautiful day. See you next time with another study reading, and God bless you.